Welcome to Eye Café, where Lorraine is currently drinking
coffee,
and Garry.
Water in a plastic bottle to be discussed.
And myself, water from a local, like a neighborhood distillery operation here in Manila. And so our votes go to Lorraine, best beverage.
locally distilled water is going to get the prize.
And you agree, Garry?
I do agree. Yeah.
That places the inaugural Eye Café Nice Beverage Award to me. So well done, me. I blew away the competition today. So today we're turning our attention to the pure fact that we are Earthlings. And I, for one, am seriously struggling with this right here. I am absolutely embarrassed to be a human being, and here's why. Homo sapiens represent less than 0.01 of the planet's living biomass. We have destroyed 83% of wild animals, 80% of marine animals, 50% of plants, and 15% of fish. This is research from 2018, Bar on et al. Millions of years of biological evolution disappearing without a mention. This is what we're seeing. 2020 marked the crossover point when, for the first time in history, the total mass of objects produced by man has exceeded the total mass of living matter on Earth. The global mass of plastic produced since its invention is now greater than the total mass of all terrestrial and marine animals combined. This is research from 2020, LHM et al. According to the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report 2021, the world's richest 1%, those with more than $1 million US, own 46% of the world's wealth. Adults with less than $10,000 US in wealth make up 55% of the world's population, but hold just 1.3% of global wealth. Individuals owning over $100,000 US in assets make up 12.2% of the global population, but own 84.9% of global wealth. Not enough folk are familiar with the terms Global South and Global North. First used in a political sense in 1969, the same year we went to the moon, the Global South generally refers to Africa, Latin America, and so-called developing Asia, including the Middle East, aka West Asia. Somewhere around 85% of the human population, i.e. the global majority. The Global South is regarded as half of a socio-economic and political divide with the Global North. The existence of this divide is largely due to European world domination through colonization, which permeates the power structures of our global human society today. Jason Hickel referenced Dorninger et al. Last year when he tweeted that in 2015 alone, the scale of net appropriation from the south to the north is staggering. 10.1 billion tons of raw materials, 379 billion hours of human labor, 22.7 quintillion joules of energy, 800 million hectares of land, all for northern excess. Imagine a world, he tweeted, where labor and resources in the global south were available to provide for local human needs, rather than appropriated for the sake of excess consumption in the global north. So here we have it. Why I am existentially embarrassed to be a human being. It's a sickening feeling that I wake up with daily. So the first question I'd like to pose in the CAF, what does it mean to be an Earthling in 2022? What is humanity? What is the importance of more than human perspectives? And for this, we go first to Lorraine.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, with that introduction, it's humbling, and I'm probably just going to answer 1/1,000,000th of the question with some thoughts, because I've been thinking a lot about how and why we're in the situation we're in, partly just through my work as sort of 20 years long in the tooth sustainability advisor who's sort of stepping out of that world because I feel like it hasn't served the purpose. And then also as somebody with a stomach, and I'll explain what I mean in that It turns out this month, at least in the US, so I'm based in Montreal, Canada, that's where I am right now, but in the US and maybe in other regions, it's Autoimmunity Awareness Month. It's, everything month somewhere. And I've been thinking a lot about autoimmunity lately for a host of reasons, including some conversations with my own stomach. And I feel like it's highly representative of what's happening. So it's tempting for me to believe there's like this group of people out there making really nasty decisions that are causing all this trouble. But I'm actually coming to see that it's more about the systems and the incentives and then the behavioral norms that we've come to see. So I'm going to explain what I mean quickly, and then I'll just get back to sipping my really nice coffee. Immunity in the individual human happens based on the body recognizing the difference between what's me and what's not me, and what's good and what's not good. So if it recognizes what's me and accepts me, then all is well. If it gets confused and thinks something is an enemy, even though it's actually part of me, it might attack. I might attack myself, which is what autoimmunity is. And if I get confused and think something is good for me when it's actually bad for me, I might let things in that kind of wear down my own defenses. And that's just basic immunity. And I'm going to do a hash of making more sense. But when we look at, is that, which one of our cafe regulars is that?
This one is Bastard. She wants me to play question for her right now.
Bastard, of course. She's always welcome. So when I look at how we're behaving right now as a society, and all of the statistics, Sam, that you just shared about what's going on economically and to the biosphere, to me, it feels like a massive autoimmune disorder, because it is actually normal, structurally normal, and I'll go so far as to say highly profitable for us to eat really poorly, for us to put things into our bodies that lower our immunity. About 80% of immunity is handled by our gut, and our sort of healthy gut microbiome is essential for healthy immunity. Yet if you look at, big food, the fast food companies, the fertilizer, the sort of mainstream chemical fertilizer companies, this is a highly profitable time. Just grab a screenshot of their last 5 years of share prices. The market is up. It is booming. And our bodies are attacking ourselves. We are very unhealthy. So it is structurally profitable to weaken our own immune systems. And then when I widen that, I think what I've noticed when I look at the world as a kind of set of phenomena, I think everything is sort of a fractal of everything else. And so my individual body learning how to look after itself, what's enemy, what's friend, and what's good and what's not so good. What we're seeing happening at a societal level feels like an autoimmune disorder writ large, where we've lost our understanding of what's really good for us, what makes us feel well, versus what do we need to expel or repulse as a society. And we're rewarding ourselves for taking in the stuff that causes us harm. And there's very little reward other than sort of spiritual, physical, or some of the harder to put a price tag on stuff for doing the things that make us feel really well. So I guess as a human, I'm just sitting with that trouble and saying, what does it look like to actually just be and be well? And how do we shake off those structural shackles that are causing real harm and either replace them with ones that reward us for really treating ourselves well, or replace them with nothing and just sort of get on with being alive?
I love that. Garry.
How do I follow that? Wow. What does it mean to be an earthling for me today is very, very deeply confusing, is probably where I would start. And what I mean by that, for those that know me, is I'm in the belly of the beast, one that is chemicals that manufactures and sells and distributes fertilizers that go into killing, ultimately, the quality of land over time and supporting monocrops and etc., etc. So over the last few years, I've got to know both of you and become more aware of my role within all of this. I'm going to struggle with the word, Sam, the hegemonic nature of everything, basically, particularly perpetuated by my own doings and beings as a human. That's what I find most opportune, but also most troubling at the same time, is the addiction that and I know many of my kinfolk this side of the world, have to everything you've both just described. High growth, more money, more stuff. And I think what's the opportunity for me is about being an earthling right now is going inside. Like what can we all be doing more of to better understand ourselves? You spoke about the gut, Lorraine. Like, who am I? Like, who am I as Garry? What do I believe in? Why do I buy what I buy? Why do I still have a plastic thing that I'm drinking out of on occasion? I try and do that less, but how do we question and stay curious about every single decision and thought that we have more often is where I'm at as the opportunity. But I'm also deeply, deeply concerned, coming off of meetings I've had this morning and the industry that I'm part of, that the rewards, Lorraine and Sam, are still far too weighted towards financial outcomes. No matter what anyone tells you about triple bottom line, B Corps, take the next well-intentioned ESG model, everything at the end is still driven by growth and how do we create more of, and not how do we create less of. And that troubles me, being someone that's really in the middle of that machine, but also really wants to be in this type of dialogue more. But it's very, very difficult to find people even willing to have this sort of conversation, even privately, to be honest. So it's, that's where I'm at as an earthling, confused, feel there's a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done by probably each and every one of us, including me. And I'm just curious if people are ready to do that, or if they're just happy to throw in the towel. And that's the painful part. So yeah, that's me for now. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you both. This question's a bit of a doozy because you really, have to interact with different levels of what it means to sort of be human. And so for me, I'm not actually even sure I know what humanity is. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure that I've seen it, or that I've seen its potential, or that I know what it is to live in it. So there's that confusion. I feel like I have a deep sense of what it's supposed to feel like when I'm seeing it. And I feel like, so the gap, there's a yearning, essentially. That's what I feel. And I don't know if that's what's sort of pushing me to find it, but there's a big hole, like there's a big black hole that I think is part of the trauma that we talk about, within regeneration, about addressing intergenerational trauma. I think it's all related. It's all part of, different words that are used to essentially describe this black hole. And so because of that, because I don't really know what humanity is, I'm not actually very interested in it. Not in the way that we, democratically look at, how most humans on the planet currently behave or whatever, and then say like, oh, this is what humanity is, because, we're human beings, right? So the average of how we behave should be what humanity is. And to me, like, that's just not the case, like I just described. There's a gap between what humanity is and how humanity is behaving right now. So if we consider that we, obviously Homo sapiens, are one of millions of species alive on the planet today, and that we have certain roles and responsibilities which are set, like contextual, they're set within the ecosystems that support our societies, that we extract from in order to, turn lights on, etc. And considering as well that we are a social species, so there's power associated with any social structure. So I think something in there is the definition of humanity. Something in there about how we behave, understanding our place in ecology, like the fact that we are one animal, right, in an ecology of millions of others. And so how do I understand how we came to this point? That's the other question about trying to address this confusion of what is humanity, because I'm sure at one point we were human, like we remembered and we were behaving with humanity, right? But something happened, or a lot of things happened in a sort of evolutionary manner, cultural evolutionary manner, that led to this point of, you know, there's a big gap now and here's this black hole, right? So for me, human beings begin to lose our humanity thousands of years ago, perhaps at the dawn of civilization itself, because civilization is about extracting resources that are, you know, it's like veins of a city reaching out into the hinterlands and like consuming. That's a civilization, essentially, according to how we currently define it. And that was the nucleation, I think, of a very specific type of incentivized behavior, something that Lorraine already pointed to, is a series of systems and incentives that promote, right, a type of behavior, a type of culture. And that turned into generations upon generations of this culture being like fed, and in an exponential way, because it be, you know, hoarding of resources, of wealth, is something that leads to this privileged lens where you only see the world in terms of how do you do more of that. And I think this is the autoimmune like, I guess, trigger, or at least that's how I'm seeing it. But when it turns into this upon generations of building, that creates a whole class of human beings, right, who only view the world in this way, and because they hold the resources, they also hold power over others through the mechanisms that they are now designing in order to further incentivize wealth to be hoarded within their control. So this is how I view civilization at the moment. And I think that is the gap between humanity and civilization. That's how I enunciate this void, this black hole, that I think is inside all of us. Open for discussion for a few minutes if anyone has something to raise in response to someone else.
Yeah, Sam, I just wanted to touch on our relationship beyond humans, because I feel like it's influencing how I'm reacting to what you're saying. So although I don't disagree at all, just sticking with my stomach for a moment, it's been kind of a theme for me for the last little while. One of the things I've come to realize, of course, we know this and there's no arguing it, but I hadn't really sort of centered it in my mind. You know, we say you are what you eat, and I'm realizing that that's actually literally true. Like every single cell in my body only exists because I ate things and converted those things into the cells in my body. And I'm 50. So for years, my body has been taking the stuff that's gone in and converted it into the cells that are me. So I am literally made of all the things that I've eaten. And so that's true of everything that eats, right? So everything is what it eats. And that very basic, like functional reality has been informing my sense of connectedness. And anybody who's chatted with me at any point, certainly over the last decade or so, has realized I'm sort of obsessed with this idea of everything is connected to everything, like all life, all past, all future. And I've sort of just been bumbling around in that idea. And now that I'm exploring more about digestion and immunity, I'm realizing like, oh, no, everything really is connected to everything. Like it isn't even just like, well, conceptually, we're all, no, like I ate you and you ate me and somebody ate us before and somebody else is going to eat us. And so when I think about humanity in that context, then I land in a really basic framing of worldview. And again, I don't disagree with anything you said. And I believe it's possible, at least in myself as an individual and in others that are going to get eaten and that I ate, to hold a worldview that genuinely appreciates, acknowledges, rewards, and desires abundance, not hoarding, but the wealth, the inner well-being that comes from all the wonderful things we could imagine of being healthy, supported societies. And that is potentially a desire, it is potentially a way to lean forward. And I think some cultures actually already embrace that, if we haven't stamped it out of them yet. And more as people are sort of awakening in different ways, they're seeing that as a potential. I don't think it's a gradual thing. I don't think you can be like kind of into the current system, but inch towards. I actually think it's an either or. And I think there's more going to the or coming from the either. So I don't know if that obfuscates or illuminates, but that's what's coming to me when I hear your thoughts.
I think something that, just to add, about sentiments within the local and global animal welfare community, thoughts on humanity often go towards, especially when we see cases of mass animal neglect or abuse, the thoughts tend to go towards, we're not human. So there's shame, like a lot of shame within the animal welfare community. And there's also a lot of, it's not even disappointment or frustration anymore. It's just a sort of resigned resentment. And ironically, this obviously places them in a perspective which denies them their own humanity when they're thinking about, human behavior towards animals. So this includes the vegan community worldwide, etc. And it puts them into this sort of moral high horse positioning, saviorship again, which is an ego-based response. And there's all of these different layers of, so I'm starting to point towards the layers of separation that you're talking about as well, Lorraine, when it comes to how we are not seeing ourselves as part of this food chain, essentially, of creatures made up of other creatures. And on a longer term context, the fact that we are living amongst our ancestors, right? So that itself is, I don't know. I think there's something in there that I hope, I think I won't be alive to see this, but I hope that we will start teaching our children again that relationality on a biological evolutionary perspective. Unsure if we will have this perspective when it comes to growth as well. Garry, you're talking about, I think growth is always going to be what we're seeking to do, but I think what kind of growth, that's the question, right? As opposed to like, where is it that we want to grow? What is development, etc. I think those are the questions that you're starting to point towards. Any comments before we move on there?
Yeah, if I may just add, Sam, it's just, yeah, I think that is the critical point, right? We are here to grow. I really believe that as Earthlings, like we are here to evolve, to become better, to become more wise, to leverage that abundance, Lorraine, that you spoke about, right? We're here for a reason beyond just consuming. That's so crystal clear to me. And I think I just want to probably just finish up my part here by just saying that's part of the opportunity for me, is like, how do we reimagine right now? Both of you are pointing to this, like it's not either or. It cannot be we try and shepherd ourselves from where we are gradually over the next net zero 2050. Like seriously, like, and I wrote a piece actually before I hand back to you, Sam, literally this past week, where it just all really dawned on me how quickly we can shift things if there's the will by those in power with resource, right? In just the last 24 months, we've introduced unconditional basic income all over the world. As COVID shut the economy, everyone got given free money. We can do it. We've seen, whatever your view of the current war, suddenly everybody's rallying around. Finance ministers have suddenly found all this money across borders overnight. Why don't you cancel third world debt then? Like, there's all of these examples that have happened in just the last 24 months of how quickly systemic change can nudge if there's the will. And that's where I see the opportunity for us Earthlings. Like, it can be done. We've proven it in the last 24 months. Do we want to do it is another question. Thanks, Sam. I'll hand it back over for now.
And I think the next series of inquiries actually points towards, is this possible? So how do power structures of centuries and millennia past manifest in our lives today? I think we've already started to answer this question, actually. But how will they dictate our tomorrows? Why is it important to consider and understand power structures, as you've just described, Garry? Thoughts, Lorraine?
Yeah, so I love to borrow a company like Google to explore this one. And it's something, it's not ready yet, but in a few weeks' time, I'm hoping a rather concrete exploration of this very question will be on my website, as I'm exploring this notion of materiality, or basing an understanding of what's material to a company in reality, a kind of odd outcropping of the ESG, environmental social governance dialogue. That's a little appendix on this thought here. So it's my understanding that when Google was first sort of getting its legs under itself and becoming a company in the 90s, its intentions were actually really quite beautiful. I mean, you know, we could debate some nuance, but the intentions were actually really neat. And the model was especially neat in that it, as a search engine, the more searches happened, the smarter the tool got. And it was a sort of self-reinforcing tool. It was experimental, of course. It was young days for the internet, young days for search engines. But let's say the power structure that conceived of it, i.e. the people who built the company, were conceiving of it in a way that potentially enabled humanity to greatly benefit. And so that, like, early stage kindness was being structured into the organization and its mechanisms. And then the power structures that currently still dominate our markets spoke and said, and this is now in the early 2000s, said to the founders, as the dot-com crash was happening and companies were folding, and lots of others I've never heard of that aren't a verb today, the way Google is, their investors said, look, you guys got to make some money. And so they had to figure out how to monetize this kind of structural kindness or structural intelligence that was being developed. And the answer was advertising. And it wasn't a unique answer. There's already advertising happening in the internet space. And there's since, of course, been a lot more. So today, Google, I think in 2021, their last financial statements, their annual revenue was something in the order of $250 billion. Incidentally, that's about the same as the total revenue of the country of Canada. So an entire economy's worth of revenue generated, over 80% of which came from advertising. And that's advertising for anything from shoes to other stuff. So what started as a structural kindness, a structural intelligence from people kind of born and raised in the last century, right? So the potential is there, the knowledge, the technical know-how, the impetus got subsumed by the other power structure that's like, well, somebody's got to pay for this, which, by the way, is a fiction. Just as you just pointed out, Garry, actually, nobody has to pay for it. You don't have to pay for it. Pay? What's pay? You know, we made that up. But the current structure said somebody has to pay for it. And now, boy, are they paying for it. And when you look at what happens to that structural kindness, now it's a series of algorithms that decide, first and foremost, based on financial outcomes. And that leads to a whole other thing, which I won't go too far here, but which is who decides, right? You know, that's a whole other question. So I think it is very important to consider this and to keep asking what changed and what was possible, because it was very possible, and it still is possible, to be sort of beautifully intelligent and kind if we layer the right incentives and awareness into those structures.
So as a very tiny example, Google's "Don't Be Evil" motto was actually included as a clause within its code of conduct in 2000 until it was removed in April or May 2018. Back to you, Garry, for your thoughts on the question.
Wow, it's. I think what gets me is just like how quickly things can change. Again, back to, I don't want to be a one-trick pony, but it's coming up for me really powerfully around what's the old saying, is it? Where there's a will, there's a way. Like, it's very literal. And I think when I look at power, again, looking at my context in the corporate world, the big power, and I mean, we spoke about this a lot, is definitely the dominating mindset of the financial markets. So there is so much of our personal agency or internal power, I believe, I used to do it, that we give away to these systems. And I don't think we talk about
Is it
that.
give away though, or is it defaulted?
I would say initially it's defaulted because of the system. If you're brought up from day dot in that system, then yes, there's a default element. But then you get to a point, I feel, where you are aware, and then you're choosing to stay silent. And that's where I see a lot of people now in my industry, is that a lot more people are way more aware than even I thought they were, but they're paralyzed by being in the system and not having the space to have this type of dialogue. And that's a power structure in and of itself, right? Is like, I'm afraid that if I speak up, I might get sacked. Or if I challenge the status quo, I'm going to upset my family, lose my pets. I'm not going to be able to have the X, Y, Z, fill in the blank. And that's the big bit for me, is that, so I totally agree, Sam. Definitely there's a default element, but where we're at right now, and I've observed it the last few years in myself and others, there's a lot more of us that are aware, but we're staying silent for a whole host of different reasons. And I think that feeds into the power structure, i.e. power plus or minus equals fear in many cases. Back to you, Sam.
And I wonder if that equation is also part of the mechanism of civilization, because of the hierarchies of control that need to be in place in order to maintain civilization in itself. So I had a lot of thoughts about this particular question. I'm not going to be able to keep it short, but essentially it's about looking at how rich our colonial masters got in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, especially the 18th century, right? Look at the institutions that they created to exert colonial hegemony globally. See how families that were rich and powerful in the 16th and 17th centuries, especially in Europe, conspired with each other and continue to be rich and powerful today through their influence, like a Wizard of Oz type situation where they sit in really ugly and expensive clothes at a machine with 1,000 levers behind a secret curtain somewhere backstage, running this giant propaganda machine that dictates, like it or not, all our lives. North or South, rich or poor, light-skinned, dark-skinned, rural, urban, science or art. They dictate what it is that we think because of where we get our information, because of how we're educated, etc. This has been designed like centuries ago. It's just like self-running now. You need to eat, they control the seeds and the right to grow food. You need to drink, they own the water. They pollute the water that they don't own. Right? You need shelter, they own the rights to the land. They tear down what you build for yourself because it gets in the way of them controlling everything. This is what is happening right across the global south. You must rent or buy, right? You need money, they're going out of their way to make sure that you don't get what you need to live. This is what we're seeing all across the globe now. It's not just global south, but with the anti-work movement, etc. This is part of this parasite of colonial civilization. They got so good at it that it's our dominant culture, right? We sympathize with our oppressors so much. That's what we're seeing with Ukraine, for example, that we're replicating their ways of thinking and their behaving. We others. We have expectations, right? We are blind to our own privilege. We spend days debating changing the color of our sofa cushions as most of the world's living creatures are literally burning, starving, or suffocating. And we've done this for so many generations that we think this is our culture. You know, this is what civilization is. I mean, just the fact that we kill 3 billion lives every single day within the food system that we've designed, just because we're convinced that we like the taste of something, and that is somehow more important than the healthy functioning of entire global ecosystems, than supporting the actual conditions for life on this planet, for our own grandchildren to be able to taste bacon or lobster, right? That's where we are. And now, consider those families I just referred to in the colonial era. They have nothing on today's oligarchs, today's billionaires, right? Wealth inequality has never ever been this bad. So there's no competition. Where do you think we'll be in 600 years? This parasite is cannibalizing itself. There's no other way to see it. This dominant evolution experiment on Earth that's happening right now, everything that we're seeing is absurd, this absurd extreme suffering, discontentment, hatred, toxicity. It's all collateral damage. We should have learned from previous civilizational collapses. There have been many well documented, all from one particular perspective, of course, where the entire world is ending. But we didn't. We didn't learn from that. We had plenty of chances, and here we are, dead planet. So that global perspective, like Lorraine said at the beginning, is fractalized into everything. This Google's, co-optation of their "don't be evil" clause, for example. And same, Cambridge Analytica. Believe it or not, they started off with exactly the same intentions to create a more democratic world, right? These are just weapons that anyone can pick up to use for any reason. These are the power structures I see. Open for any responses.
I really want to pick up on something here. May I? Yeah. So I'm asking myself, how have I internalized these power structures? And I feel like there's two themes that come to mind for me. One is design, like that default that you talked about, Garry, where if you're sort of born into it, you don't even know, like our fish hosts, what is water, right? It's like, what water? That's just what I'm in. And then the other is blind spots, and they're kind of overlapping. So can I sense the default design that I'm in, or is that a blind spot? Once I can ask myself that question and can at least circle a blind spot, I can go into it a little bit more and see what is my role in that structure. So I'm going to keep this like really microscopic, literally, because that's as much as I can own in this giant planet. And I'm going to just pick on gluten for a second, because it's an area I've been understanding a bit more. And there's like oodles of very concrete supporting information that can show you how this one sort of food input disarms a very key function in our digestion. And functional medicine practitioners have known about this for some time. This is not even vaguely controversial. And yet the gluten-free conversation is kind of siloed as a bit like, California, or it's a food trend, right? Or it's a hashtag, or it's a high maintenance thing in a restaurant. And it is super normal. And frankly, I'll just come right out and say delicious to like have a croissant, right? Because it's yummy. And it's been so embedded in at least in my cultural culinary experience, that to question it is just annoying, right? And I get it, like it's annoying. But actually, it's structurally problematic. You could say this for alcohol, right? Like how we've baked alcohol into our cultural norms. And it doesn't take a doctor to kind of sweep through the wider community and see where alcohol might be problematic. But it's so ingrained, so structurally normal that I, as an individual, no government is telling me to get drunk or eat croissant. I, as an individual, have to overcome these massive barriers, including my own palate, in order to do something that doesn't kill me. So if that is the norm, then I have to recognize those design structures of my own culture, at least see my blind spots and question them, and then experience alternatives in such a way that I can at least sense, like literally sense with my own body, the differences and make intelligent decisions, which I actually consider really difficult. But I think that is the challenge for me. And then I try to, as a kind of little microcosm, be the fractal that I hope would be in the wider experience. Because beyond that, I just cannot take down a Russian oligarch. It's just like so far beyond my capacity. But can I take down my own personal impulse to cause myself harm? Can I start there? So that it's so basic, but that's kind of where I am on this.
Yeah, it resonates so much for me. Like I get so wrapped up in the big picture stuff sometimes that I don't do that. And I think you wrote something about this the other day, Sam, about like just doing that and like within my 1 meter circle around me, my family, my community, like what can I actually leverage there with this new awareness? And still try and nudge the system through the company I work within, build community. So I think there's this like yes and piece within me, which is quite new, because I used to believe, because of the story of separation, right, that like I could only be one thing. Like I either work for the company or I'm trying to be the best husband, you know, always looking at just the one thing. And I want to come back to that piece about like our own power as an individual human, back to Earthlings. As an Earthling, we have got a ridiculous amount of power no matter where we are on the planet. Far more than we believe we have, particularly if you're in the global north, to ask questions, to challenge the status quo, to get curious, you know. And I guess my invitation with this part is just, I would love for us, as we try and remember that Earthling nature, is like, how do we get a lot more curious? How do we ask more searching questions? Because I do think that's part of this, is that curiosity piece within ourselves and also sort of systemically. So I'm going on a bit of a tangent now, Sam, but that's...
No, but I think this loops back to Lorraine's point about it's not easy. Like, this is not comfortable. Like, it tastes good still, you know? I think it comes back to that point for me. So shifting in our final question to a little bit of a, I guess, focus on the North-South divide. Class and power structures manifest among Earthlings in a way that we in the CAF often speak of as this North-South divide. What do we understand about systemic privilege and systemic oppression on an individual and a cultural level?
Shall I kick that one off? Yeah. Well, my first gut feeling literally is I understand probably very, very little. Like I can intellectually explore it, and I have done a bit in conversations with you and on my blog and, you know, in other contexts, but a little bit like I was just describing, you know, the default being I slowly engage in habits that kill me quicker than I would have naturally died if I lived well. It's probably almost impossible for me to be genuine about those structures, but then I can like hop out of that and say like, okay, we'll try again. And I can see that I know a lot of what I'm going to put benefited from in quotes, because I don't know if it truly is a real benefit. Like, is it really good? But the way I have become who I am is very largely based on those structural global north-south power structures, the degree of extraction the degree of colonization. And I can even, I mean, I think I'm probably not alone in the sort of Canadian white settler community of having a defense of, well, but my people weren't the aristocrats. They were the ones trying to get out from under, or like find a better way, and, you know, part of some movement that was maybe an early pass at trying to shake some of these power structures. Maybe, but I'm still very much the benefactor of the inequality. And that's educated me and made me feel like it's normal that this inequality is here, that we have these developing, you know, third world countries, poor things. If I'm lucky on my vacation, I can go help them out. So I can see those power structures. And then I guess the last thing I would say is, if I'm really honest about what I think is possible, I think of times where I've been in the global south, or in a kind of context that is not my own, how amazed, and now I'm no longer amazed, I'm just like, oh yeah, this wonderful thing where it's like, oh man, this is where so much knowledge and wisdom is, so much that my soul starts to relax, right? It's like, this is a good feeling where there's a connectedness and an awareness of a sense of tradition and context that reaches way, way, way back to a time I didn't even know existed. And that ought to be more normal in my crusty little white heart. That's how it feels to me now.
Oh, God, if you know a little bit, Lorraine, I know even less. But I think what comes up for me in this, and again, because of this quite unique lens I have being in the global chemical supply chain, that's where I can speak quite clearly, as I've learnt more, particularly with you two and others the last 2 years, is just how designed, particularly when you look at the financial services and you look at manufacturing, there is a lot more know-how about how influential those power structures are. Why is it that it's one Australian and one North American company, and we'll come on to mining in another occasion, but how is it that there's two non-Southeast Asian companies own the rights to a gold mine in West Papua? Like, that is known, that is systemic, that is designed. Otherwise, they could just give it back. So there's that lens which I'm really curious about, and I believe I'm starting to understand more. Is, oh right, okay, so financial services feeding expansion, growth of a particular plant, access to resource, and then you start to see how all of this money, back to those terrible stats you shared, Sam, at the beginning, why they're so extreme. Because if you've literally got a very simple diagram of North taking everything literally out of the bucket, bar 3%, taking 97% of the buckets, biodiversity, resource, everything, and just siphoning it up to the North through that very, very financial mechanism. Whilst I don't think it was designed that way originally, I can see why civilizationally, as you're describing, Sam, how we are where we are. Because back to what I shared earlier on, we could give all of that back tomorrow. We've proven it in the last 24 months. We don't need to hold on to it. So that's where I'm finding this really interesting. So I think I'm probably know more about now what's going on the big system bit than I do on the local in place bit. And that's where I need to learn a lot more. I want to learn a lot more about actually my immediate 5-kilometer circle around me. I probably know more and understand more on a global systemic level than I do about what actually food gets grown around here, which sounds mad. So I'm almost flipping, if that makes sense. As I'm understanding the bigger picture, I'm now more curious to go more local but I still know next to nothing. But hopefully what I'm sharing is at least getting someone a bit curious.
No, but I think that's really important that we touch upon that point, the fact that we are specifically made to not know, right? Like, these are things that concern the whole world, that we are kind of like hidden from, or it remains hidden from us, and intentionally so, right? So that we don't challenge the mechanisms that you described, Garry. And I think, like, again, right, this global level intervention institutional level intervention, individual level intervention. I think those things have to happen in parallel in order for any one person to actually understand, like, what is the thing that you're grappling with here, because of the fractalization of the entire thing, of the entire experience, right? This embarrassment of being a human being, in my perspective. And so for me, like, what I understand about systemic privilege and systemic oppression is how I'm a part of it, how I'm a part of systemic privilege, and how I'm a part of systemic oppression. And I think in the global south, this is all very obvious to like everyone. You know, there are explicit descriptions of how the system works, and everyone knows that that's not how it actually works. For example, it depends on where you are socially. It depends on who you know, who it is that you can have on speed dial, for example. And to a much limited extent, that is the case in the global north for very sort of specific, especially legal situations. But otherwise, that's, it's just not how things are. Whereas in the global south, this is a matter of survival, right? Life and death, like today, tomorrow type thing. So I think for me, having grown up in the most privileged part of Southeast Asia, as not really like a privileged person who actually was connected to heritage, etc., and then going to live in the UK and Sweden and continuing to challenge power structures and getting not very good responses from people with power within organizations, to the point where I've been fired, my visa has not been renewed, and I've been kicked out of projects for ridiculous reasons, for example, all the while I'm facing xenophobia, racism, etc., which kicked off especially during Brexit. So these are the ways that I understand systemic oppression, right? Because we lived these things. These are constant barriers in our lives. And how I experience it is homelessness, joblessness. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to stay in this country. I'm not sure if someone is looking to deport me right now, etc., etc., etc. And I'm not even, an activist who is actively being hunted by their own government, right? Not yet, anyway. I don't know. But that's the situation that gives me an understanding. Having said that, I am one of the more privileged people in Southeast Asia, right? I cannot deny that. Cannot deny that I'm probably in the top 25% of the global population in terms of wealth. And I have pretty much nothing, which is crazy, because there are people with really actually nothing, right? And I have this nothing because they have their nothing. So this then comes into play the idea of co-liberation, and exploring and understanding what co-liberation actually means to be with the koalas that you have burnt, be with the salmon that you have made extinct, right? Accept that, because this is part of the trauma. I think that especially the new generation coming through just now, they want to fix this trauma. They are compelled to do that. And for us, older generations, to hold them back is literally a crime against our own humanity. It holds us back from achieving a way for us to restore what it is that we are losing or have lost. I'm not trying to say that it's all going to be fixed in one generation. I don't think that's the case. I think, we're looking at a 500-year timeline here. But if we can somehow incentivize the acceleration of that, right, with the structures that we have in place, etc., I think we all know here amongst the three of us that that's what we're trying to work towards. putting in place foundations for structures to be created, to be experimented, to be initiated, etc. Open for comments on this question before we wrap up.
I can't resist. Sam, something that's really striking me when I think about these power structures. So imagine I show up with two friends, and I show up into this room, and there's about 30 or 40 of us here, and just kind of do like a kind of average of your people. And one of my friends is a molecular biologist and works in the kind of medical device field. The other is a grandmother. That's kind of all we know. What sort of assumptions and stories are we likely to begin to tell ourselves about these people? And I'm assuming a bunch of assumptions on behalf of these imaginary people, so I'll fill in some blanks. The molecular biologist working in the medtech community is part of an industry that, like, if you look at, for example, Toshiba, which is Canon devices, some of the most advanced diagnostic tools in the industrial medical community, or even Johnson & Johnson, which of course we know for their vaccines, but they're also medtech diagnostic devices. These folks are making incredibly sophisticated, sometimes quite amazing tools, right? And machines that are in the hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars to produce, sell, operate. And the people who operate them earn very, very high salaries. And again, look at the share prices on these guys. It's through the roof. The reason there is so much demand for these sophisticated diagnostic tools is because we are in a state of collective physical failure. And one of those failures would fall into the category of autoimmunity and diseases that are connected to autoimmunity. Others as well, cancers and other types of physical failings. So I automatically assume a higher level of sophistication and knowledge in the molecular biologist than the grandmother, who may actually know more about digestion and eating well and being healthy and feeling satisfied and connected and empowered and enabled, and how to support my community in doing that. And by the way, how to not need those expensive diagnostics, how to not need billions of dollars in medtech devices that frankly clog up our suffering healthcare systems. But my instinct by design is to think that that guy or gal is of greater value than the medtech specialist, than the one who actually knows how to eat and feed herself and feed her family and feed her community. And so as a result, we're in this cycle of training people to not know how to eat and then to be sort of helped by these highly financialized tools and systems. And so the call that I'm making to myself is, how can I recognize that that's not class structure the way we might typically look for it, like rich and poor, or owning or not owning. It's a whole other, it's almost like consciousness class, to recognize, where does real value flow? How do I really empower myself and others around me to thrive? And what can I recognize in that and maybe change, or maybe just be aware of? That's what's really sparking for me.
Garry, yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it really super succinct, which is unlike me, Sam and Lorraine. But what is enough? Like what is enough? Open question. Like, what's enough food? What's enough resource? What's enough clothing? What's enough shelter? Particularly to my global north folks. Like, what is enough? I wonder how asking this type of question might create a new narrative and may create new stories over time. It's certainly not a narrative that I'm used to having within a corporate space. So yeah, that's what I feel moved to share, Sam. Really, is just really that question is, what is enough?
Thank you for that, Garry. Quick round of checkouts. What is one thing that you take away that someone else has shared that you hold in your calf? Lorraine.
I think for me, Sam, it's from your opening comments, just the kind of very succinctly packed array of embarrassments of us earthlings, and a reminder of the scope and scale of what we're really talking about here. I could argue it wasn't new, but it's newly packaged and newly reminded. So really grateful for that. Thank you.
Cheers, and Garry.
I'm going to seem like I'm just copying Lorraine, but it's the same. Like honestly, it's just the diversity of the messaging. It's just the diversity of the weaves. I think that's what's really impacted me, is just the number of different strands that make up this current state that we have. But I also want to add, I'm going to be cheeky to take two because I'm in sales. Lorraine, I really, really loved your point, how you just referred back to the body and the gut biome, and actually just reminding me, you know, we are quite literally, we are what we eat, quite literally. And I think, again, story of separation, I can sometimes believe that what I put in my body is just stuff. Because I do like pizza and I have too much of it, genuinely. So too much information. How about you, Sam?
Pizza can be healthy. I think the most important thing I take away is the reflection on how interventions need to be understood as fractal and can be, and in fact should be, parallel. So in the sense that whenever we think about, you know, what it is that is mine to do, there are different levels upon which we can act. And I think this is the part where what Garry had said, like, you're often just focusing on one area of it, where in reality, in order to change yourself, you have to work on many areas at sort of the same time. So this is not to say that everybody should do everything, but rather to say that we can think of different levels on which we can have a way to exercise the individual power that we have. So on that note, that's wrapping us up for today's CAF session. Thank you all.
Cheers.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah.
Thanks, bastard.
Who are you talking to, Lorraine?
She's there. I see her on the sofa.
No, that's Mom and Chubb.
Sorry. That's Mom.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Mom.